Most developers don't lose money on a bad market. They lose it on a deal they never should have done because they didn't know what they didn't know. I'm Paul Kelton. I'm a real estate broker and an operator based in Charleston, South Carolina. And I run GRID Charleston, which is a monthly investor meetup where we bring in local operators, developers, deal makers to talk about what they're actually building here in Charleston. No gurus or motivational fluff, just real people doing real deals. Tonight's guest is Drew Turner, principal of Ashley Cooper Properties. Drew is a Charleston native who spent 15 years working on some of the largest development firms in the country, managing over $815 million in commercial projects across multiple markets and asset classes. He now applies that institutional level discipline to local development right here in the Lowcountry. Tonight, we get into how to evaluate raw land and infill lots, how to run numbers on ground up development deals, who you need on your team, and in what order, what costs first time developers consistently get wrong, and what a deal looks like today that Drew would immediately say yes to. If you found this video and you've been thinking about building instead of buying, you're in the right place. Before we get into it, a big thank you to our sponsors who make GRID possible and totally free. Tide Property Management Co., Coastal Equity Group, Matt O'Neill Real Estate, Sweetgrass Capital, Coastal Creative Media, Mitchum Law Firm, and Apollon Wealth. We couldn't do this without them. All right, here's our conversation with Drew Turner. When I was planning this event, I was racking my brain on who might be like really well versed in this. And I recalled a meeting I had a couple of years ago after going to a ULI event, the Urban Land Institute, with Drew Turner. Drew is a Charleston native and he's principal of Ashley Cooper Properties. And he brings over 15 years of experience in commercial general contracting, owner representation, consulting, and institutional level development. Throughout his career, he's worked with some of the largest and most respected firms in the industry. Drew has managed over $815 million in large-scale commercial projects across the country in various markets and asset classes. He applies this expertise to execute local developments with institutional level precision, overseeing due diligence, financial modeling, design construction, risk mitigation, and asset strategy to ensure best-in-class results. He's done a lot of work across the nation, and he's also doing stuff here in our backyard. So let's just welcome up Drew Turner. Thanks for being here, Drew.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, Drew, I know said a little bit, kind of gave your bio, but if you can just kind of tell everyone in the room how you got to where you are and the stuff that you're working on today.
Yeah, I'll try and be as quick as I can with that. Yeah, I studied construction, went to Clemson, moved to Atlanta, worked for a large, national general contractor, was a multi-billion-dollar firm doing projects across the country. So we would, pack up shop and go to each individual project. I'd be out there for 12 months, 24 months, depending on what the project demanded. It was anything from data centers to, residence halls in the higher education market. And so after about 10 years of construction, gypsying around the country, decided to get back to Charleston, which is where I'm from. So, I always tell people Charleston was never really if, just when I got back. So I did that in, I guess, 2017, and I hired on with a international brokerage firm, Jones Lang LaSalle, so JLL, but I worked in their project and development services vertical. So we were former contracts, architects, consultants, providing owner's rep and CM services for, various folks, either developers out of the area who needed local expertise and bandwidth, or it was in users, tech companies who are doing office upfits and construction and development isn't their wheelhouse. And so did some third party consulting in that capacity, and then connected with a former client, went back to, more of the construction day to day. He was a regional kind of boutique developer in North Carolina. And so we were rolling out this big multifamily program. So we delivered 2,500 units in a couple years of multifamily. So you're, 250 to 400 unit garden style walk up or 4-story, corridor type products. And some of your, maybe not like primary markets, but we did a couple projects in Myrtle Beach, Raleigh, Columbia. And then I guess a couple of years later, just wanted to take the jump and made the leap of faith to kind of go out on my own and start doing some small development projects myself. So the thesis was take that institutional level, experience, that large scale commercial experience, and do smaller infill projects and do here in Charleston. So help build and develop the communities here and continue to make the bet in my own backyard, and yeah, so uh, that's what we're doing. That's where we are.
So when did you go from the big company to going off on your own and doing it yourself?
That was in like middle of 2024, so it's been almost 2 years now.
So kind of walk us through starting out on your own in 2024 to where you are today. So what has transpired since then?
What happened before then was I had a project. We had been doing some small investment deals on the side, some smaller flips. We had a small portfolio of rentals, short term, long term. Had the opportunity to do a ground up development and pretty much liquidated that portfolio and put all the chips on the table with the development deal, right, wrong or indifferent. We kind of went for it, and so that had started. We closed on that parcel and began that process. Luckily, it turned out before kind of making that move. So we had a deal in the hopper, if you will, and so on the heels of that deal, decided to spend all my time instead of just the side time pursuing other opportunities, networking, trying to build a pipeline of brokers and land opportunities, and trying to see what we could do, and our process is again identifying those land opportunities and kind of going through a highest and best use of analysis. And our initial intent was to try and do smaller commercial developments, but with land basis and construction costs, particularly in a coastal land sparse community. It was pretty hard to get those kind of deals to pencil, so we just kept going through. Well, can't do small office or warehouse flex product. Can we do a small apartment, and can it rent and actually cash flow? And all those answers were no until we got to for sale residential. So just to use that project as the example, it was a little more than a half acre of land. It was owned general business, so by right we could do any kind of residential development, and landed on 8 townhomes. So we were
That was the
pushing.
first deal.
That was kind of the first deal. And so while we were pushing that through pre-development, we were trying to kind of continue to build the pipeline and other opportunities.
Gotcha. Awesome. So you went through a process of elimination of all the different asset classes and ways you can use the property, and you settled on townhomes that I can build and sell individually. Right.
Correct.
And you did a half acre, you built 8 townhomes, and you've sold all 8 townhomes.
Knock on wood, July 1st, we sell all eight
Knock on wood.
town-
Let's hope, let's fingers
all eight
crossed, hope for the
townhomes.
best.
Yeah, so
That's
we'll
great.
so we'll so almost 2 years later, we're gonna go full cycle on that deal.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thanks.
That's awesome.
It's been a
Yeah.
grind.
Yeah. So, well, that's really cool that you've gone full circle on one and that you have others lined up
Mhm.
pipeline, I'm sure now, right?
Yep, we do. So we have a 18 unit townhome development. That one was an acre and a half. Kind of went through the same process. I was able to, get a 18 unit yield out of that site, and we've gone through entitlement, permitting, and right now trying to determine the next move. So as everybody knows, markets changed a little in the last, 6 months or 18 months when we first started underwriting this deal. So we're trying to determine what the next move is. We've looked at a small, build to rent type deal as opposed to going, for sale. And so we're working through that one. We've got another one that's almost 4 acres. That's been, we've got some site plans that could yield as much as 18 units, and we would do that detached to try and diversify a little bit from the attached townhome product and market. And then we've identified some other infill, or what we kind of call spot lot opportunities, where it's an acre we've subdivided into 2 lots, or it's a quarter acre or half acre where we're only doing one with the one spec home, whatever it is, to sort of fill in between these long, arduous entitlement permitting process
Yeah.
projects.
So tell me, when you look at a piece of land or an infill lot, what do you look at to just kind of back of the napkin to see if it may or may not be a good deal for you?
I mean, cost is the first thing. Like, what's the rough cut land basis? What is it as a percentage of overall like project cost? Does it even make sense to spend the time? And if we kind of know where that needs to be, and if it's in the ballpark, we'll continue to kind of work the process. So, how big is it? What municipality or jurisdiction is it? Is it in a county? Is it unincorporated? Is it in a town or a city? How development friendly are they? What is the zoning and what you know by right, what can we do? What's the appetite for a rezone or like variances if the site's too small and I need more space? Is it road frontage? Do I have to put in a right of way so that I can get density or get more units? Yeah, I mean, and that's just kind of off the cuff.
Yeah.
And then it
So is
need
is the best way to like so it sounds like you kind of like try and figure out what you can do with it and then you work backwards from that end product to what you could possibly pay for it and then seeing if the pricing expectations with the property owner is there.
right.
Right.
And then, again, kind of through that process, I even mentioned, of course, comping out like if it's a for sale deal, if we think it's in a nice area. I mean, again, I said all that under the assumption that this is a nice kind of prime parcel, true infill, Charleston. I wouldn't even say like MSA or Tri County area because that's pretty expansive. We try and stay truly infill so that we can, pay the higher prices and actually get the higher back end sales
So for
numbers.
those of the people who are like here for the first time or may not know, like how do you define an infill lot of what you're looking for?
Depends on who you ask. Some people will qualify that as walkable. So take Park Circle, for example. If you're within, Park Circle proper and you can get on a bike or just throw on the shoes and walk to Montague, that's infill. If you're anywhere within a, 5 or 10 minute drive of that place, some folks also kind of define that as, infill.
Mm.
What I would not call infill is Bridgeville, Hollendahl, Hollywood,
Right.
Ravenel. But some of those places are still within the Tri-County area.
Yeah, gotcha. What are the biggest, just like off the top of your head, what are the biggest zoning or density or setback or utility issues that just kill the deal right off the bat?
If you can get through the land cost and if your land basis supports the deal, then typically it's infrastructure. And when I say that, I mean, access to an entire parcel, which is a road, 40, 50 foot right away, depending on if it's public or private, all of the, typically you don't have balanced, very rarely do you have balanced sites or do you have like export sites. Everything's low. We're in the low country. Everything's low. You got to bring in fill material for roads, pads. That's if your soil conditions are favorable. So, you do a geotech and you find out you have bad soils and you got to remediate or whatever it is. So, anything that happens under the slab is what really makes deals challenging and what really introduces the unknowns.
Anything under the slab. Sounds like there's a lot that can go wrong.
It's not for the faint of heart.
Man, that's crazy. So walk us through just like the basic math of a development deal. So we talked a little bit about land purchase, we talked about building, we talked about, of course, selling at the end. But what does that look like from purchase to construction cost to profit and then eventual sale?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just use that townhome deal as an example since we're getting ready to make an exit and it'll be a successful exit. I mean, maybe not as, good as we underwrote, but given the circumstances, it'll be a good deal for us. So we bought that parcel for, a little bit less than $500,000, which would have ended up being about 20% of the project cost. So depending on if you're doing a large development, obviously there's economies of scale. So you have a large parcel where you can get a ton of yield. That cost per lot or that overall percentage, is smaller. But on 8 units, I mean, that was about 20% of our cost. On a home, for example, you're probably close to 30. If you're just looking
So
at like overall,
20% is like a healthy number.
it's probably pretty. When I was saying, does it smell right, kind of that initial barometer. Like if it's anywhere in that range, 15 to maybe 25, you're going to start to push it.
Yeah.
Uh, it's worth continuing to look at.
Okay. Gotcha.
And so if anybody else knows or sees or has experienced anything different, like by all means, let me know.
Yeah.
And so, we probably spent from there, call it another 50, 75 in soft costs. So engineering, other consultants, geotech, surveying, legal, those are all kind of considered soft costs. And then, we had financing costs in there and then the vertical piece. And so I think our construction loan was about $2 million on that
Mhm.
one. So I think all in project cost, we were at about 2.6 million in total project cost.
Wow. What do you think if there's like one cost that, maybe first time developers or, people who are new to it that they underestimate? What what would be a cost that people underestimate?
I think that so again, it's your exposures are in the site. A lot of them are. So you got to make sure you have plenty of contingency or you've done a ton of due diligence on that piece. And then, with the challenges in the entitlement and permitting process and the unknowns of what municipality and what jurisdictions, the utility companies that have to review infrastructure, how many reviews are you going to have, how long is that going to take, that schedule and some of those challenges directly impact your financing and your carry cost. And so you struggle with permitting or you get held up with a, utility extension, then, those unknowns turn into months, turn into tens of thousands of dollars as the clock just continues to tick. So really having a good handle on that and understanding how that impacts your carry and your financing and your
Yeah, because
your
you
interest
still,
obligation.
if the utility company is like, sorry, not going to be able to get out there for 90 days, I mean, you still got payments you have to make, right? To hold the land. You've already closed on the land, so you just got to kind of suck it up. How much do you typically like estimate for that? I'm sure you build that into the budget, right? As like basically like a contingency cost if, having cost overruns on one aspect of the project or another. How much do you typically estimate that in the budget?
I like to be conservative on the time frame, first of all, because then that's just going to give me a more conservative, carry projection. So where, if we think we can do it in like 5 or 6 months, I'll plug 7 and make sure that we've budgeted the carry accordingly.
For 7 months.
Uh, yeah, you throw in an extra couple months, then depending on how far along you are in the design development process, or again, like what your overall project cost is, it's kind of best practice to include anywhere from 5 to 10% in contingency. Maybe you do a little bit more in your horizontal. Maybe you can do a little bit less if you've got some nice tight drawings in your vertical. So you just kind of have to go off gut and experience, and just be conservative.
And I'm sure that there are ways like, let's say the utility company takes 90 days longer or whatever than they said that they were going to take. I'm sure that there's ways down the line to kind of cut project costs. Are there ways to cut project costs down the line if you absolutely have to, or do you just, once it's done, you're just kind of going along with it?
I mean, not really. Once you, especially some of these kind of quicker ones, right? I mean, once you're kind of through the ground and you're going vertical, you're going as fast as possible.
Hmm.
And a lot of those decisions are already made, and your costs are baked because you're ordering materials and you're trying to feed the job as fast as possible. So, and we call it kind of value engineering. You go through like a VE effort. Maybe you can do that on the front end if you see you're going to have some budget challenges, but you might find a couple bucks here and there, but those aren't
Yeah.
huge like needle
So
movers.
once you start to go vertical, I mean, you're set on the course. It's pretty much how it is.
That's how
You can
we
see
treat
it.
it.
That's great.
So
So how do you, for these projects, how do you typically finance them? So is it one lender, and then how much cash could one who's starting in development have to, bring to the table total project cost?
I mean, it varies, on project type and delivery and your appetite for risk. You could do, more conventional debt, and there's, local lenders, there's, hard money lenders, there's a ton of different lenders out there where you can, if you're a little more risk averse and you don't want to be subject to the leverage or the carry exposure, you can, do 55, 60%, leverage and come up with a balance and equity. There's other products and lending partners that, can get you to 85, can get you to 90%, so you've got a, lot higher leverage, you've got a bigger tap that's running, you've got, some more financing, risk, but you don't have to bring as much to the table because you're only making up a 10 to 15% delta
Gotcha.
in equity. So
So it just depends on the deal and how it lays, right?
correct. And how big it is, right? Because the other part of that is, with these hard money deals, if you're doing a quick flip and it's 100 grand, for renovation and you're making the personal guarantee on that, like what's your balance sheet look like? And what's your risk appetite look like? If it's a $2 million construction loan and you're guaranteeing that and you need the balance sheet to support that, maybe that's a different conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. We talked about this a little bit. You mentioned like 7 month time to build or whatever. What does a realistic timeline look like for you from like day you see the opportunity to day that you have offloaded everything and you've moved on? You've gone full circle.
Yeah, I mean, it's a year and a year. So I wouldn't expect to break ground any earlier than a year. And then it's going to take you a year to do everything else. And it's simplest form.
Gotcha.
Again, it all depends on like size and scale and scope, but you could probably tighten that up a little bit if you're just getting like a zoning permit for a single family home or, a small subdivision. But again, we're doing a small subdivision. It's 2 lots in in a county that's unincorporated, and going through a minor subdivision process is taking about the same amount of time as it takes to go through a major subdivision process.
Mm.
It's a lot of red tape, a lot of back and forth, revisions. You've got to go to if you're doing, stormwater designs or you're doing a utility extension, like all those submittals, like that whole process also goes through the state.
Yeah.
So on the townhome deal, we were within 2,500 feet of a receiving body of water. So we had to get a coastal zoning certificate, and that all went through DES. And so you think it's a small project, only a couple units, or maybe it's a home, but it's, we got one that we're doing. It's on the marsh close to, you know, we got a OCRM, we got a critical line. And so it still takes a long time. So again, kind of big picture, I kind of call it a year for the entitlement and permitting process. And then, between some dirt work and going vertical and then the sales, depending on how many you need to do and what absorption looks like, it's going to take you a year to go through that process.
Yeah. So it could be upwards of like 2.5 or 3 years with total cycle, right? A year of entitlements, then a year of construction, then a year of sales,
Yeah, I think, I mean,
or
again,
shorter
so
than that.
I'll be more specific. That's kind of a general rule or kind of a general guideline. But on the townhome deal, I mean, took us 2 months to get through design, another 8 months in permitting. So we were 10 months there. And then we were able to break ground. It took us another, I don't know, 6 months to get through site and vertical. And then, that's why you kind of plan for the worst. Going back to your utility example, we were basically at a point where we could have gotten CO, but we did a utility extension and then we basically sat there for 3 months while we
Oh
tried to
man.
go through the certification and approval and feeding process to the utility to where we could finally get CO.
Man.
So yeah, again, like one thing or another will likely happen. And
Plan for it.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah. The agent in me is curious. So let's say you see the opportunity, right? And you start your like back of the napkin underwriting, make sure it makes sense. At what point are you like writing an offer? How much contingency are you building into the contract? And then when do you feel comfortable like you can close on this and then start taking on the risk of the actual development?
yeah, so this is a really good question. And on this townhome deal and a couple others, we took one approach, which I don't necessarily recommend. I don't know that I
Yeah.
would consider it best practice. And then I'll tell you more of what we're doing now. And that's large in part because they're bigger deals is more cost. There's more on the line. So, with that parcel, we took the risk. It was a uh, you know, kind of unsophisticated buyer. We got connected to someone who was selling the deal. We made the decision to close on it. We did some initial due diligence. I think we might have had like 60 days with a 30-day close. So it was enough for me to do a geotech. We understood what the site conditions were. We got a zoning confirmation letter from the city, and we knew by right what we were going to be able to do. So we kind of had a floor to what could happen. And we went ahead and took the risk and closed on that land. And we knew what we could do and we knew what we wanted to do. And that delta was kind of gravy for us, right?
Yeah.
What you should do is get that development parcel under contract. You should write in your, LOI and ultimate, PSA around what you plan to do. And if that requires a larger entitlement effort, you need to, rezone, or we got a project that we're working on now that we are going to have to do an annexation and we got to go into another municipality.
Gotcha.
You want to make those offers contingent on those things happening. And if you can pull it off, kind of the best practices, you want permits in hand. Like, I want to be able to put a shovel in the ground before I am 100% financially committed to purchasing this property.
Gotcha. So you
Now,
build in more protections into like the contract before you close.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, these aren't like we're gonna go do an inspection in 2 weeks and in 30 days we close. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
work that way. Like, we're gonna go spend 6 months doing due diligence, and we're gonna go through, you know, permitting, and we're gonna try and get at least a revision or two, or get a preliminary plat approval. Like, we're gonna get some paper in hand to give us the level of comfort that we can go do what we need to do, and kind of most importantly, do what paying that price, allows.
Yeah.
Because landowners want the money that reflects what it can be at the end of the day, not what it is right now.
Right.
And we're going to bridge that gap and help get them a premium for that, but it won't be at my risk.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, right? You're taking on an enormous amount of risk because there's 100 moving parts that are going on.
yep.
So you've got to make sure everything at as much as you can mitigate that risk as much as possible without moving dirt. Yeah, that makes total sense. So I've just got a couple more, and then we're gonna turn it over. So I'm just curious, can you go through a couple, deals that you've looked at that you've said no to, and maybe why you've said no to those deals?
Sure. I'd say on the smaller side, it's, maybe again, kind of a spotlight development deal where we were going to do a spec home. And right now the market's pretty soft and days on market are extending. And there's some unknowns there where you need to be a little bit more conservative on the underwriting, and like literally everything just backs into like, what's the land price? Like, what's
Right.
the purchase price? And we're saying no to a lot more of these opportunities because, again, trying to be conservative, I wouldn't underwrite it for anything more than what it comp out today. But now I'm actually like, okay, well, what if it softens and we lose another couple
Over the next
points
12 months. Yeah.
over the next 12 months? What happens? Do we make a peace deal? Does inflation slow down? And what's Kevin Warsh going to do? And, what's the rate environment going to look like over the next year? I mean, all these things, play into that decision process. And just based on trends, I'm not going to go assume I'm going to get another 5% or 10% on the current, comps or ASPs for that type of product or that area. I'm going to assume I'm going to get like 5% less.
Right.
So we're saying no to a lot more of those opportunities because the margins are getting slimmer, and it just doesn't become worth the risk.
Yeah.
So the larger ones, the bigger development ones are like wetlands. We find a nice parcel. It's like, okay, great. We got 7 acres. We got 14 acres. So, maybe we can do 20 units. Maybe we can do 30 units. And it's like, all right, well, half of it's wet. So, what does that do? And how much acreage is it? How much would we have to disturb? Is it, jurisdictional wetlands? Is it, do we do a individual permit? Do you have to pay credits? Like, there's a ton that just goes into just wetlands alone. And those are easy things you can find in like county GIS layers.
Right.
So those are, kind of some of the first torpedoes, I guess, that go into deals. And then, yeah, it just becomes like, again, road frontage. Can we get access to the project? If not, like, what does that look like from an infrastructure standpoint? And, it's just becoming more and more challenging. Municipalities are, you're seeing more regulatory costs. That's becoming more of a conversation, and
Sure.
some buzzwords and buzz topics. And I mean, we're seeing it in like impact fees. So like what municipality is it in? How development friendly are they? Are they?
Right.
I don't want to call any out specifically, but there are some that are way more friendly than others. There are some that are, cost more than others. And so a lot of those things play into kind of the first few points of analysis and decision making. And
How many deals do you think you have to look at to find one that might pencil?
couldn't even begin to answer that question.
You think
A
it's like
lot.
100 to 1? Is it 1,000 to 1?
I mean, it depends, right? Like if it's something that I find, or something that like somebody sends me or I find like listed or whatever. I mean, in aggregate, like everything, yeah, I mean, it's probably in the 100 to 1. Is it if I spend a couple hours like underwriting everything and going through like the GIS and zoning ordinances, if I get into that level, probably looking at like 5 to 10, no, more than that, probably like maybe 20 to 25, might be a quarter of that. And
Yeah.
then I might be getting one of those.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So
All right. Makes sense. And then just real quick, one piece of advice you would give, like someone was like, man, I'm dead set on being a developer. That's my passion. I want to take on all the risk and go through all the craziness that goes on with development. What piece of advice would you give that person who's just starting out here in the Charleston area? What should they do? Who's the people they need to talk to? Where do they need to look? How do they get started?
I mean, is don't do it an okay answer? I mean, things like this are great. You mentioned ULI earlier. I would get into Urban Land Institute. That's a lot of what they do and focus on. Talk to consultants, meet with engineers. I mean, those are the guys who are working with folks like me and other developers in the very early stages. They're trying, they understand all of the nuances of like code and ordinances and what you can do and what you can't do. What does dirt look like?
Mhm.
What areas are better than others? Again, like municipalities and like which ones are more friendly than others. I don't know.
Expand the network,
Yeah,
talk around.
that's all you can do.
Figure out a good partner, figure out a good team to put together. So, all right, great. Let's take 2 minutes. We'll do a little refresh. If you guys can talk to your neighbor, talk. Hey guys, let's hear from you guys. This is all about you guys tonight. So let's hear questions you have, takeaways we can bring up for Drew in the back.
Yes, is the short answer.
Thank you. And the second question, what you were just talking about, where you're taking months and months, like to get your shovel, how does that work with the actual seller saying, "Hey, it's going to take 6 months before I make a decision"?
Yeah, it's a great question, and probably, one of the bigger challenges outside of just the underlying fundamentals and financials is, and a lot of what it requires is education. You've got what I call an unsophisticated seller. It's a mom and pop. It's, they've inherited the land, whatever it is. They've talked to a broker and they think it's worth $1 million an acre. And it's like, okay, well, maybe if somebody spends $100,000 in permit drawings and gets it to where you can develop it, it would be worth that. But under agriculture zoning and its current state, it's probably worth 200 grand. And you just have to have that conversation. And these are it's an extreme example to kind of illustrate, but you have to talk to them. And if somebody's distressed and they don't have the time and they're like, I need my money in 60 days. Well, it's like, okay, well then I can only pay you X. You give me a year, you give me 10 months, then I can pay you Y, but you have to have the ability to kind of go for the ride. And there's a very good chance there's a possibility that this doesn't go anywhere. We could have to, rezone or get a variance or annex. Like there's any number of things that any municipality or, kind of authority having jurisdiction could say no on, and then the deal's dead.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
You're doing
The cost, and then doing an attached product just gives you more density, gives you more yield, more units, per acre, less cost per unit. So we saw on these smaller deals, you almost have to do that for them to actually work. And they're not in like A plus, areas. They're still great areas. It's Charleston market. It's infill, but a quarter acre in Old Village isn't going to, get you the same that same quarter acre in like, half acre in Ladson, could yield.
the second thing is you mentioned the yield. When you're, what would you say? Maybe what's ideal? What's ideal and not so ideal as far as yield? What are you trying to pencil out on the deal net at the end? Make it when you get done. We say that was. I think you used the phrase it was really good, and then some that aren't good, and what.
Yeah, and it kind of it depends, but I would say in general, if we're gonna go full cycle on a deal and we're heading like 20 to 30%, like that's a pretty good deal. Like I'll take it. I mean, we'd underwritten some of them for more, and like this townhome deal. By the time it's all said and done, it's probably gonna be a 20 to 25% deal, and maybe like 12 to 15% like return on cost. So for comparison, like you have a larger like commercial or institutional level development, you've got institutional, equity, everybody, the kind of the industry standards like a 6 or 7% return on cost. So you can, hit 12, 15. Like that's I consider that pretty good.
That's great. What other questions? Great questions, by the way.
Sounds like do you need to know 100 different people to get through the process?
Yeah, you do. 100%.
One person that can oversee that whole process, or
Yeah.
more realistic to really get like 3 to 5, or because I don't know anything about most of that.
Yeah, no, in a couple of deals, I am that person. I've got partners who have found opportunities. They didn't know exactly what to do with it. It's a, larger parcel. They recognize like, hey, this could be something, but like, I don't know how to do all of this. And, we have partnered up. They either own the land and they kick it in and we use it as collateral. We use it as equity to go get the loans. And then I kind of run the process, and we make our partnership splits, or whatever. But you can have somebody or a partner or a paid third party. I mean, there's like third party development consultants that exist. Or if you're the one doing it, then you kind of need to have the Rolodex of consultants, of planning and zoning department employees, the other 90 people you need to know.
You have to have engineers, right?
100%.
They do so much, but they're not going to be talking. Well, they might talk to the county, they can.
Yeah, they may, and you can lean on them. And some are better than others with like bird dogging the process, and but you still kind of have to know what you're doing, because engineers aren't perfect. They don't know everything. Everything's up for interpretation, and to some degree. And so one engineer might say like, this site you can get 20 units. The other one might say, well, no, you can only get 15. And so if you go with one and you do your underwriting and go try and like raise capital on one assumption, and it's the next, and the deal doesn't pencil anymore all of a sudden. So
That brings up a good point. What are the essential players in like a developer's Rolodex? Like who? So we said engineer. You
Yep.
have to have a good engineer.
Yep.
What other players do you have to have? That you can call upon.
I mean, not in order of importance, but you got to have a good surveyor. You need somebody that's quick and responsive and does good work. One that understands ordinances and zoning and what you can do if you're saying like, hey, I'm going to go do a subdivision, and guys that know what minimum lot sizes are and easements and setbacks. Like those guys are worth paying for. Surveyors, geotech, you got to understand what's in the dirt, somebody that can test it and tell everybody else what's going on. Civil engineer to do site planning, architect, structural engineer, because architects won't stamp anything. Trying to kind of work my way up. You got to have a great real estate attorney, good lawyer. I'm missing stuff, but a builder.
Yeah.
If you're not doing it, if you're not holding the license, you got to have a good builder partner. Yeah, an agent, got to have a good agent, somebody that could go like market the deal, whether it's commercial or residential. It doesn't matter. You got to have the right person. Ideally, it's kind of their niche, their wheelhouse. Yeah, man, social media, marketing, everything.
Yeah. What other questions do we have?
If you use sometimes mezzanine financing.
No,
What type of financing do you typically do? Who do you look for?
I mean, we've got some good hard money partners, some, private credit funds and then some folks we've teamed up with to do some of the higher leverage stuff. We don't really have like a traditional kind of LP partner on the equity side. These deals aren't big enough. We're either self-capitalizing them or, some small friends and family raises, or they're like true equity partners. They come in the deal. And like I mentioned, I've got one where we got a partner who's, we're using the outright owned land as, equity. And yeah, on the debt side, it varies. If you've got the opportunity to do conventional, like great, lower leverage, lower risk, lower cost capital. But if you don't have that luxury, there's lots of good, more hard money private lender products out there.
Cool. Well, dude, you've been great. Thank you for giving
Sure.
us all this
Thanks for having
value.
me.
Yeah. How can we as a community support you?
Man, yeah, I mean, we're always looking for opportunities. We're always looking for deals, whether that's small infill, like like I said, spot lot, kind of single home development deals, to commercially zoned parcels, to larger, swaths, larger acreage where we can do, some large scale subdivisions and resi developments where we look at everything. So if we can't self-develop it, we'll kind of go through the process. And, our kind of value add is in that big lift up front with entitlement and permitting, overall programming. And, if we can't do it, self-develop it, then we'll find the right person that wants that project. So yeah, and the other side of that is if anybody else has any questions or you guys ever, need anything, I'm always available and happy to be a resource.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah.
It's been awesome. So Drew's agreed to stay for a little bit afterward if anyone wants to come up and talk to him.